We're on the same side.
When I woke up this morning, I was feeling pretty dangerous.
Think about the past and think about the future.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Draftvice. As I, Walter, it is Shane, the Shane, THEE _ Shane _ MCM on Instagram. And we got Ricky back. And if you want to follow the podcast, you can follow it at Draftvice on Twitter, at Draftvice _ football on Instagram. Really check out the Instagram. We got a lot of new stuff going on over there. And if you want to follow me, you can follow me at Brojo Death Punch. That's BROJO. Death is in the end of life, and punch. Yum. Anyway, so welcome back. This week we are talking fantasy, folks, and we are talking expert consensus rankings and sometimes manipulating those. And then we're also going to talk about some of our big targets that we're drafting in the fantasy drafts. So we were talking about this the other day. There's a lot of guys who are higher up on some expert consensus rankings that it's like, why are they there?
Right.
And you might want to be a little closer. So...
And the inconsistency of some of it, too.
Yeah.
Like you might see how they rank a quarterback, and then you're like, yeah, but why are all their receivers so low? You would think that they would correlate to some degree.
Yeah. It's almost they place bias at certain positions and almost forget like who's throwing it to them. And to explain expert consensus rankings, fantasy football is so popular, and there's a lot of pundits and websites and media outlets for advice. So who get labeled the moniker of expert, which a lot of them are. So what happens is expert consensus rankings is basically the mean of where all these experts are ranking them, and how some of them don't make sense is what we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, like you have ESPN, which they have Matthew Berry. They also have
Field Yates.
Yeah, they have like 5 different Stephania Bell, and they all give out their rankings, and some of them are a merger of those groups. So you'll have somebody who might be a little bit higher, but then you're playing the app, and you're like, wait, I saw Matthew Berry was really high on Corey Davis. Why is he all of a sudden why is the expert rankings very low?
And then the other, like my favorite one is called The Fantasy Footballers. That's another podcast with guys like Mike Wright and then things like that. Adam Azer from CBS Sports is really good. But some people, it's so drastic, the difference. One person will say, my breakout for this year is this person, and then another expert will label this person a bust. So it's just like you have to take each with a grain of salt and then find that mean, which is where ECR comes in.
Mm-hmm. And but the good thing with ECR is sometimes you can manipulate it, that you know where these rankings are, and a lot of the especially with mock drafts, they affect a lot of people are mock drafting right now, or they are drafting, and if you go on auto draft, you're now drafting based off this ECR. Mm-hmm. So now people think that that's the value of a player based off of the ADP in those mock drafts and fantasy leagues. So you can hop on there and see like, oh, Corey Davis is going in the 6th round, or Mike Williams is going in the 7th round, and you're like, well, I think he's a 5th rounder, and you see, oh, wait a second, it's because of their ECR. You might be able to sit there and say, all right, well, since I know ESPN has them this far down, then I can go, all right, well, maybe I'm willing to take them around higher. And there's just some of them that, the rankings don't exactly make sense. Some of the guys that I pulled up were Cooper Kupp was, he's currently going at pick 42 on ESPN. And I feel like that's a little high.
For what format?
PPR.
You said what, 49?
No, 42. And
CBS Sports has them at 42 also in the overall rankings.
Yeah, so
consistency.
Yeah,
between two different sources.
But here's the big problem with that is you get a lot of these consistency, like these ECRs, and then I think what ends up happening is it kind of creates a groupthink.
Yeah.
You get like 20 experts who say Cooper Kupp in the 4th round or Cooper Kupp in the 5th round, and then you get like 1 or 2 who are saying, well, I wouldn't take Cooper Kupp until at least the 6th because torn ACL, coming off an injury. There is a possibility that offense takes a step back.
Lots of mouths to feed in that offense as well.
Yeah, but if you're also saying that offense is going to be really good, it's a potential that they're like that those guys will end up playing really well. And you can lots of mouths to feed is kind of a weird argument sometimes because there's lots of mouths to feed. But we've seen players like we saw last year. We saw 2 top 20 receivers from the Rams and Robert Woods was a top 12 receiver, and Brandin Cooks was a top 15 receiver. We've seen it with Minnesota Vikings. We've seen it with Stephon Diggs, Adam Thielen. So there's usually like I know that that argument can make sense, but a lot of times it's hard to tell. Like that's that was one of my big questions with the Lions. A lot of people seem to be down on Marvin Jones and up on Kenny Golladay.
Yeah.
But Marvin Jones is the clear like 1A, 1B, or at least the number 2 receiver over there. But if you look on ESPN, he's their expert rankings have him in the 80s, like the high 70s, and I know that they have a couple of experts over there that have him even lower than that, like close to the hundreds. Not as a 97 was the spot where some of the experts had him, which I feel like is a little low for a guy who 2 years ago was a top 10 receiver in fantasy. Now maybe he overperformed, but when he was playing, when he wasn't injured, he played consistently.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a combination of a couple things. Number one, maybe he was above what his typical value would be, and he's kind of overperformed. And people take that into account along with their projection for Kenny Golladay, because I think a lot of people think Kenny Golladay has the potential to be a number 1 receiver, a standalone number 1 receiver anyway, or he showed flashes, and they might be jumping on that potential. And then on top of that, when you talk about how much one person's production will affect the other person's, it's kind of scheme dependent and what their coaches are. Because if you look at Sean McVay, you might not be worried about the fact that they're able to spread the ball around to a lot of their weapons because they're going to get all the weapons they can involved because that's just his mindset. He's very creative in doing that. Others will kind of feed the hot hand over and over and over again. And, I don't know if a lot of these people are looking at Kenny Golladay to pop like a top 5 level receiver where you would design whole playbooks around them. And it would leave someone like Marvin Jones kind of on the wayside who's probably benefited from the fact that they didn't really have other number 1 receivers, and on maybe a couple other teams he would kind of just faded into the background.
Well, that's the reverse of the too many mouths to feed argument.
Right.
It's there's one really good guy, he's going to take all the targets, and so the other guy's not going to do very well at all.
Right.
And it's kind of you just don't know. You never know the answer to that question. Everybody's saying with the Lions, it's going to be a run heavy offense. They're going to target Kenny Golladay. It is going to be a lot deeper routes probably, but with deeper routes, if you're only throwing it, he gets 8 targets a game. If he gets 3 catches for 80 yards because he's running these deeper patterns. And Marvin Jones does one thing really well. He's good at that 50-50 jump ball maneuver that he's kind of open when he's not open and seems to get his body positioning to the corner, get it up, and it's almost like he's a basketball player when he's playing. So with the expert consensus rankings, I feel like again, there's one argument that you're saying, oh, there's too many mouths to feed, and the other argument is they're just going to go ahead and go straight to the number 1 guy. And and with the Rams, we've seen it happen where they had 2 or 3 guys be fantasy relevant. And in fact, last year, Cooper Kupp, Brandin Cooks, and Robert Woods at the beginning of the year were fantasy relevant.
Yes.
And I think that's part of the problem of trying to predict what the next year is. Sometimes you can, and sometimes you're trying to make a calculated estimate. You're trying to take a risk of, all right, I don't think this guy's going to do well because, maybe it's Cooper Kupp has a torn ACL that he's coming off of. It happened less than a year ago. You're trying to his role in that offense is he's trying to make lateral movement. He's trying to make hard cuts. He's trying to, he's a route runner. He's not just running a deep ball and going straight down the field all the time.
Right.
So when you're trying to make you're trying to fake to the outside and go in, or even if you're just trying to make a lateral, like you're just trying to move from going straight down the field to all of a sudden cutting in in a dig route or a crosser. Or again, if you're even on a slant, you're still making a lot of varied movements that you're not just going in a straight line.
Right.
Which coming off an ACL is a big deal.
He's a big cut guy though. That's a lot of what these slot guys do. But this is where, it's not necessary. We're not just ranking wide receivers though. Like you could compare him to other wide receivers, but now we're taking into account the whole draft. If he's ranked 42nd, that means he's going in the 4th, 5th round.
Yeah, and that also means that there's running backs that he's going ahead of.
Right, or you're just even an elite tight end if you want one. They're usually there at that time. I don't like drafting tight end that early. I'm just saying depends what your roster format is or what your strategy is. But I don't know if I would want to spend draft capital like that early.
Especially in a guy coming off of an injury.
Exactly. or on a guy that's going to be on what's predicted to be a bad offense.
Yeah.
So
And that's
in reference to Galladay, not Cooper Kupp.
Yeah. Well, even if you think that Cooper Kupp could be on a bad offense, there is an argument there that, hey, they might take a step back. They might got figured out from the Super Bowl and people getting to watch that. Is Sean McVay going to scheme it differently this time? Is he going to figure out a new way to go ahead and beat everybody else? I like how Sean McVay schemes things because he seems to get his receivers, specifically Kupp and Woods, matched up on linebackers all the time.
But here's the thing, though. We are thinking about the Sean McVay that had a healthy Todd Gurley. The offense regressed significantly towards the end of the year and in the postseason once it became he got written out of the game script, kind of, or had a very limited role, which is a huge, huge, huge red flag for Gurley this year. And there's been kind of some smoke signals going up. They re-signed Malcolm Brown. Yeah. They drafted Darrell Henderson. It's almost like they're overstating how healthy his knee is. Like, no, he's explosive. He's fine. There just seems to be a lot of red flags and smoke signals that they are hoping he's okay, but they're preparing that he's not going to be fully okay. And it's going to be interesting to see how much the offense changes because of that.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Oh, well, and I have noticed that they're kind of putting him on a veterans regiment. So the people who are making the argument to keep Todd Gurley relatively higher, it's... they're going to manage his snaps. That's why they brought in these people, is in case somebody goes down, they have a backup plan. He does have arthritis in his knee, and you can kind of see that he's starting to have these kind of bone chips that are coming out. Mm-hmm. And that's an issue that might be manageable over time, but we've seen players play with that right now. And actually, for some reason, all the Georgia running backs seem to have knee issues. Whether it's Sony Michel, who came out last year and, again, had a similar knee issue, had arthritis in his knee, and, in fact, it's a very similar issue.
Chubb had a gross one in college.
That's what I was thinking, is Chubb. And that's the one thing that never gets mentioned with Chubb is that he had that horrible knee injury, and I know that they've medically cleared him and said he's fine, but it's not something that ever gets really brought up for people who were afraid of running backs with knee injuries in the past. Same, Dalvin Cook came out. Dalvin Cook's not from Georgia, but another running back who came out and they kind of gave him some red flags medically, and then he tore his ACL that year.
Yeah. And zooming out to a bigger picture here on how you approach fantasy football in general, these little nuances and all these multiple unknown variables that we're talking about, these if statements and whatnot, this is why we look at expert consensus rankings, because they try to take, the hard numbers that we have and kind of get some sort of an aggregate together. But there's so many factors that make it sort of unpredictable. Is the coach in a good mood that day? Do they run this scheme? Do they get along with this person? How are they going to fit with these people? Their opponents, their strength of schedule. Are they playing better defenses that are better against press or whatever it might be? And I'm just talking, general terms, but this is why I think you do have to take into account that you can look at these expert rankings to get an idea, but then you also kind of have to go off your own individual analysis of what works for you, what's worked for you in the past, and also the league you're in. You might be dealing with people that, just draft running backs, and they have a strategy. Your league that they go for quarterbacks, or they look for them on the waiver wire. Other people are wide receiver heavy. That's what I mean. So that might adjust your rankings. That won't line up with what the expert consensus rankings are, or what everybody's number one overall pick is, because you might also know ahead of time you're drafting at the bottom of the round. Well, I'm just going to take Saquon Barkley off the board from the beginning because he's not going to fall to me. So this just makes it that much more complicated, but it's important to take into account. Like, you have to do your own analysis as well.
Yeah, and it's all risk assessment. Now, there's certain risk assessments that sometimes they kind of go both ways. It's so many mouths to feed, but are they taking away coverage? Like, like in the situation of Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley, right? Julio Jones is such a big dominant threat. Calvin Ridley's getting a lot of balls, and Calvin Ridley's a good player,
right?
Good route runner, does have some drop issues, but if he's getting open and he's only going up against single coverage, he's open a lot.
And traditionally, the number two receivers on that team have done pretty well, even though they have a guy like Julio Jones you would expect them to force the ball to. But Matt Ryan, this goes back to the type of quarterback Matt Ryan is, he will see the field and spread the ball around. Yeah. You might have other quarterbacks that are kind of heavy on their number one target and fall in love with that connection. But because of the situation they're in, Matt Ryan's more of kind of spreading the ball around, going through his progressions, going through his reads, kind of by the book. It benefits those people in that number two spot. So when you look at the whole picture, it's not that crazy to think that Calvin Ridley would be worth that pick and not worry about Julio Jones, mitigating his production.
Yeah, and it's all a percentages game. Nobody's getting 100% of the targets.
No.
Right.
So if Julio Jones is getting 30, 35%, and
Which
then
is a gargantuan amount.
yeah, that's a high level. But that's about the highest amount you see from a receiver. But if that guy's getting a third of the targets, not everybody else is getting another third. A lot of times you're getting 15% from this guy, 5% from this guy, maybe another 12% from the running backs.
Running backs are
particular
getting
tight
a
end.
lot more targets in the game nowadays too. But for like your first 5 picks though, which guys like that's when your risk assessment needs to be the highest, because everything after that is trade potential later on, might not even stay on your roster. So your first 5 picks, that's when risk assessment is the most important, because that's going to be like the core of your team. If you want to use a high draft pick like that on somebody like Kupp, I get it, but like there's going to be other people. I feel like Calvin Ridley's going after him. So is Tyler Boyd, DJ Moore. Those guys like that are getting drafted after him.
Guys who were wide receiver 2s last year and are also only very early on in the league and aren't coming off of injury.
Right, and he's getting drafted in the same round as guys like Aaron Jones, David Montgomery. A week ago. Now he's moving up. But I'm just saying, there's solid running. Mark Ingram is going in that range. It all depends. One, what your roster needs. Like if you have 2 running backs already and a wide receiver, then I understand taking Kupp. But it all depends. Whatever gives your team the best chance of winning should always be what you draft, rather than just whoever's ranked highest.
Yeah, and I know we were talking about somebody yesterday. Chris Carson has been going. I think on the ECR he's 33 on ESPN, and it seems to be a couple of their experts seem to be in that same range.
Yep.
I don't have him nearly that high because I just don't think he's that. I don't think he's that impressive of a running back. I don't think he's not a good mover. He's like a powerful guy.
Mm-hmm.
He has a jump cut, but like his vision is good, but his athleticism to make those cuts, his athleticism he could see the hole, but the hole closed up before he even hits it. So then he's just powering through.
I think he was a top 15 running back last year, though, wasn't he? He was like 12 or some shit.
He was. And now you're trying to make the assessment of what's the odds that this guy becomes. This is where risk assessment really comes in, is what are the odds this guy's going to be, say he's a top 15 last year, what are the odds he's going to be a top 5? And I don't see him being a top 5 running back. But are there guys in that same range that have a chance to be a top 5? What about a guy like Sony Michel? He's on a high-powered offense. He's got Tom Brady. Maybe the Patriots take a step back, or maybe they lean on him, or maybe they put him in a more rotational role. Same thing with Aaron Jones. Is he first off? Aaron Jones has a couple of question marks. Do we know that he's going to be the lead back, or is it going to be Jamal Williams and him in a timeshare? And what happens with that if he misses a pass protection? Are they going to take him out of the game?
Well, you don't know with LaFleur. All I'm saying, he is quite obviously the number 1 running back on that team. Mm-hmm. From weeks 8 through 14 last year, he was the number 5 running back in fantasy. I know that because I had him on my team because I picked him up late. If he should be the number 1 running back there, all the talent's there. He does have an injury concern right now, like he's dealing with something, but just I feel like he's going way too late for the talent that he has and the team he's on, because he faced when your quarterback's Aaron Rodgers, a defense isn't going to stack the box on your offense.
Yeah.
So he faced 8 men or more in the box only on 13% of his rushes last year, which is ridiculously good for fantasy purposes. So he's going to get a lot of opportunity. And Matt LaFleur does like to run the ball because he uses the passing to scheme it and to hide it. So,
and that's actually the other argument is, hey, you're getting the guy carrying the mailbag for Aaron Rodgers. Like having anybody attached to Aaron Rodgers, especially the guy who might get a couple of carries in the red zone, and Aaron Rodgers gets it in the red zone quite a bit. Now he's also in the past, Aaron Rodgers has been consistently throwing it in the red zone. But like you're saying before, with LaFleur there, they might call plays differently. Also, Aaron Jones can catch it. Mm-hmm. He's not an elite level speed running back. He doesn't have. There's like maybe 10 guys who I think are better players than him in the league, but he's got a great and there's some situations you don't want to make true assessments on, but there is stuff there that makes you go, That's where the risk level goes up. It's, hey, this is a running back, but he could be a top 5 running back just based off the situation alone and the fact that he's with Aaron Rodgers, and he does have good vision and good power.
Yeah, and you brought up a great point. His stock goes way up when you're with a quarterback of the caliber of Aaron Rodgers. Anytime you have a great quarterback, and it doesn't matter who the running back is, right?
Yeah.
They're going to benefit from it. I mean,
The Patriots, they always have a solid running back.
whoever it is.
Yeah.
And that's a perfect example. I was even going to use the example of throwback a little bit to Peyton Manning. Knowshon Moreno nobody wanted Knowshon Moreno on their team. He wasn't really putting up any numbers. But when you mixed Peyton Manning in and calling audibles and putting them in the right situation, his stock went way up. He was a valuable fantasy pick during that season with the Broncos. And that's just an example of, like, when you have somebody there, it makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah, and well, even Knowshon Moreno, but also Monte Ball
Mm-hmm.
and C.J. Anderson. I mean, that's why he's ever made any kind of money, is because he was the running back who was with Eli Manning. And a couple of years ago, he was a top 10 pick.
Yeah.
Or a top 2-round pick in fantasy. Ricky, I know you're a Denver fan. How do you feel about Courtland Sutton going in like the 95 to 110 range?
I mean, it makes sense to me. I understand because, look, there's a lot of ifs there.
Yeah.
I do think he's a good fit for what Joe Flacco does well in terms of throwing the deep ball. He's a high thrower, high and outside. Not the most accurate, but, Sutton's got, long arms. He can maybe correct for some of it. I think he's a better fit than some of the other receivers with Joe Flacco, but it's still, I don't know how I feel about Joe Flacco, so I think it's understandable where they'd have him ranked. Now, where I would take a little bit of issue is there's some people that have Deshawn Hamilton ranked ahead of him or around the same as him.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I agree with that. I see it on CBS Sports from a couple of the experts there. And unless they're assuming that Emmanuel Sanders goes down with an injury again, because there are concerns about that, that is the only time I can see Deshaun Hamilton kind of filling his shoes in that role. But other than that, I mean, Courtland Sutton might take over as that big play, red zone, deep ball target.
True number 1 guy.
Yes, I think the only if is Flacco.
Yeah, well, and that's a big if. And
Yeah.
I think that's a lot of the reason why a lot of Denver players aren't getting a lot of hype. But we've seen guys have some fantasy relevance with Flacco. We saw it with John Brown last year before Lamar Jackson came in. We've seen it sometimes with tight ends. That's why I think you were a big fan of Noah Fant. And
I like Noah Fant a lot, man. He's good.
Yeah, so do I.
But I'm not a big fan of rookie tight ends. That's the thing.
Yeah.
He'll look good. He'll be good real football-wise, but this is a fantasy, discussion. Fantasy-wise, I don't like rookie tight ends, and I don't like tight ends on questionable, at best, offenses.
And we're not sure how that tight end rotation is going to play out
Right.
because they have a few tight ends they drafted within the first 3 rounds in the past couple of years on that team. I think Jake Butt's still coming back, and you have Hireman and a couple other guys that they're trying to get into the mix. So I don't know where Noah Fant is on the depth chart right now. I believe he's 3 or 2, but you would hope until that becomes clear cut, it's not really worth the risk high up.
And I just think Denver's going to be a conservative offense, which usually doesn't bode well for wide receivers.
Yeah, I think they'll be run heavy.
Yeah, but I
Take a
do.
shot here.
I love Courtland Sutton coming out of SMU. I was hoping we would find a way to draft him last year, but he's really good. I like him a lot. But yeah, like you said with Flacco, besides too, if Denver isn't winning as much, and if Flacco's struggling, if people are going to start clamoring for Falk to come in or whatever.
Drew Lock.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know what I'm thinking, but it's like.
One-syllable words.
Yeah.
But also with Courtland Sutton, he shows some of that special ability.
He's good, dude. He's going to be good.
And he's taking a leadership role, you could tell. I mean, it's not always good to have fights in camp, but I like the competitiveness that him and Emmanuel Sanders, he wants to jump into that leadership role, and he's getting on people.
Now, the question is he Devontae Parker or is he A.J. Green? Like, is he somewhere in that spectrum of guys? Because he shows some of that true athleticism and that ability to just pick the ball up over somebody's head and keep going. And I've seen that before with Devontae Parker.
Yeah.
But then Devontae Parker never turned into anything.
Yeah, wow.
But then again, who was throwing to Devontae Parker?
Correct.
Ryan Tannehill. But
Correct.
now he's got Ryan Fitzpatrick and Josh Rosen, so he's a sleeper candidate for this year.
He's always a sleeper candidate, though. I hear that every year, but it's just eventually.
I was being facetious, but yeah, because like Devontae Parker, but it's also a head thing too. I feel like sometimes.
It becomes a confidence issue if you never fulfill that, and you hear people always saying that you're a bust or that you're this or that. It'll fuck with you.
Yeah.
And when you're changing coordinators and you're changing quarterbacks and you're never getting chemistry, and now they have different schemes that they want you to run. A couple of other guys that I had on the list was actually Brandin Cooks is relatively low.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of
Brandin Cooks?
Brandin Cooks. They have him going about from I think it was like 38 to 47, and I feel like that's kind of relatively low for a guy who I would take him in the third round. He's a borderline top 12 receiver. I understand there's some worries because they think he's going to play that distraction role, but I mean he was there last year and he was a top 15 receiver.
Mm-hmm.
And he's done it 3 years in a row on 3 different teams. He's gotten over 1,000 yards receiving. So, like, with Brandin Cooks, I'm always a little shocked that people kind of still doubt him.
Yeah, I think he's the clear-cut best receiver on that team. I just think that,
Based on talent, yeah.
Right, and they do spread the ball around, so they'll all do very well. But the question is, like, that does become a real thing at a point where he's like, all right, he might be a number 15 or a number 13, whatever he is in terms of, like, points for receivers in the league, but Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods might be right there.
Yeah.
And, for him to be 5, they're just probably not sure that those guys are going to be, they might take away from that. So like I said, they spread the ball around, but when you get to the extremes, is he ever going to reach the extreme?
And I think with me and Brandin Cooks, I feel like there's some running backs that get put ahead of Brandin Cooks in general that I feel like, are you sure you really want to take that guy instead of Brandin Cooks when Brandin Cooks has that ability to be at least a top 12 receiver, and that running back maybe doesn't have that top 10 or top 5 quality. That's why I tend to lean heavy early the first 2 rounds on running back. And then I try my target for running backs are guys who can be that top 5 to 10 guy.
Put it this way. What did you say Brandin Cooks was ranked? 40s?
Yeah.
Yeah, and would we have Chris Carson? I know CBS has him in the 30s.
Yeah. Would you take Brandin Cooks or Chris Carson?
I would take Brandin Cooks.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't even think twice about it. So, like I said, it's to your point there about the running backs being ranked ahead of them. There's a case in point.
You also have guys like Mark Ingram, 51st. That's right after them.
Yeah.
So that's a tough pick between Ingram and Cooks. I never draft Ingram because every time I do, it's bad luck. But I know he's so talented and he's going to be on a run-heavy team. But I'm just saying, yeah, I would like PPR. I would be less trigger happy on Cooks, but in standard, absolutely, I would take him.
Yeah, because he's not playing that role if he gets a lot of the short catches and getting 10 to 15.
Yeah, that's what
small chip away at you.
Yeah, if Cooks is your wide receiver 2 or your flex even, you've got a pretty good roster.
Yeah, and I think in PPR it makes sense that they're all kind of ranked around each other though, the 3 of them.
Yeah,
because they're all going to get targets. It's just a matter of which one's going to get the big plays.
Well, and that's where that risk assessment comes in from earlier, where it's like. And Kupp and Cooks are right next to each other, but again, like we said before, Kupp's coming off an injury.
Right.
Miles Sanders, the rookie running back, is the one rookie of the major 3 that I feel like is not getting a lot of love.
Mm-hmm.
And
he's starting to though.
Yeah.
After this last game.
Well, because I saw the jump for David Montgomery going, and now it seems like, I mean, I did see eventually that they would probably because. Usually after the preseason, people catch on to the rookies. That's why it's like if you draft before the preseason, you're usually like somebody who's very on the ball, but you're also taking the risk of guys getting injured in the preseason. But it takes some actual like, all right, well, this guy doesn't play in the preseason, I have to worry about that. And there's also less and less veterans playing. Like this weekend, I think there were like 3 different teams that didn't even play any of their major players. And with Miles Sanders. Like now you're getting closer to the actual fantasy drafts. Now all the people who are like fans but they tune in probably in August to tune in, they're looking at it going, oh, who's this guy who just blew up a play that that is all in the jumbotron. So with Miles Sanders though, he's running behind Philadelphia's O-line. Now I think it might come down to his rank will probably end up changing by the time people draft on Labor Day or by next weekend. Mm-hmm. But Miles Sanders, I mean, he's an athletic freak. He's running behind one of the best O-lines. He's got a good quarterback in Carson Wentz. I was always shocked when people were giving more love to David Montgomery than him. And I think it's because they keep on hearing people pay attention to the stuff that's coming out of training camp. Like, oh, we're not necessarily tied to playing him right away. And I get that. But he's a whole different level of running back than anything else that Philadelphia's had in a while. Probably since LaShawn McCoy was there. So...
But this is all right. So He's going to be this year's Kerryon Johnson. What I mean by that is Kerryon looked great in preseason last year for the Lions, and everybody knew talent-wise he was probably the best running back on the team, but they were going to try to force the ball to Blunt, force the ball to Riddick, and it was going to eat away his targets, but it's like everyone kept saying hold on to him because eventually he's going to win out. Sanders is competing for rushes and touches with Jordan Howard, who only a few years ago was a good running back in Chicago. Chicago was, inclined to get rid of him because he did horrible in their offensive system that Philadelphia has the same exact fucking one. Like, it's the same offense.
I never understood the trade, but I think the key thing was it was for a 6th-round pick, and it was to kind of cover their ass because they didn't have that kind of player on the roster yet.
Right.
When they made the trade, it was before the draft. So it made it so that they didn't have to reach in the draft or people couldn't predict what they were going to do in a particular round.
Yeah.
Which that's the point of free agency and trades is to go ahead and shore up your team before the draft, and then you get to go ahead and draft who you want at a particular spot.
Right. And Jordan Howard, he's going to get a lot of touches early on, maybe some goal line work because he can get through the tackles like that. But I say come by like week 6 or something like that, Sanders will have that job unless he fumbles the ball a lot like he did in college.
Yeah, that was always my big worry with Miles Sanders is the risk of fumbling, but also possibly pass protection. You're coming into the NFL. A lot of rookies have problems with that. So that's also why it takes them sometimes some time to get onto the field.
And
Kerryon Johnson, I think, could have been a league winner last year, but then he ended up getting injured towards the end of the year, and they shut him down.
He won me a lot of weeks, though.
Yeah, I'm a big Kerryon Johnson fan. No, I was just going to say real quick point, good point about the fumbling, because coaches are quick to put rookies in the doghouse if they fumble once. You know what I mean? They'll shut them down for a couple weeks after that, and I've seen it over and over again. So,
well, Matt Jones on the Redskins a few years ago.
Yep.
That was a guy who was a 2nd-round pick, similar situation, really athletic, was a freak of nature, but he couldn't hang on to the ball for shit. And they were like, well, you're not playing this week. We're going to give it to Chris Thompson and some other dude. We're going to give it to Rob Kelly, guy who we found off the street holding a backpack. So I don't really that's something that is a big issue with a lot. Now, granted, Andy Reid, was it Kareem Hunt fumbled his first play in the NFL?
Yeah.
I don't know if he's fumbled since, but he fumbled his first play, and they still played him that whole game. So there's some coaches who will stick with somebody.
And that worked out for them. We know Andy Reid is kind of, he does some unconventional stuff. He's pretty creative, and I think that he operates a little differently than most coaches, which makes him great in some respects. But, you'll see a lot of the traditional coaches just won't forgive that, especially for a rookie running back.
Yeah.
It's like you have other things working against you. The fact that you're already a rookie running back, God forbid, you're a later round pick. They don't want any missteps like that. They can't have any mental errors.
Well, and I think in Kareem Hunt's case, it was they had nobody else on the roster. And also, his history in college, he never fumbled.
Right.
And that's something that translates really well to the NFL. Guys who fumble a lot in college tend to fumble a lot in the NFL.
Yeah.
Guys who don't fumble and take care of the ball in college tend to keep doing that when they hit the NFL.
Right.
So it's a good way of gauging which rookies you really want to latch onto. That's why David Montgomery has some upside and some potential, but people have already seen him in the preseason do some spectacular things, and now they're on him.
And Jacobs has the most solid opportunity at being a running back 1 because of the situation in Oakland.
Yeah.
But if you want to spend, because he's going in the 2nd round, if you want to spend that on him, go for it. I'm not too inclined to do so. I was on Montgomery because he was going in the 6th round a while ago, but now he's moving up to 5th, late 4th, so I don't know about that. But out of all 3 of them, I would want Montgomery the most because he's going to be most likely on the best team. I mean, it's splitting hairs between them and Philly, but Sanders and Philly, like we said, he's a rookie. All it takes is one mistake. That not only that, but he's going to be fighting for touches much more potentially than Montgomery is. And then,
well, we know Montgomery's role. That's the key thing. And even though Mike Davis is there, I think Mike Davis again was one of those situations we were talking about before, where they signed him to kind of cover their ass, and then they drafted a guy.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's I kind of agree with you. I especially for the value, like Josh Jacobs going in the 2nd, 3rd round area. That's an expensive price.
Yeah,
to
that
pay
means
for a guy who's brand new.
You're taking him over a potential wide receiver 1.
Yeah,
and I don't know if I would want to do that.
Also, with him, Richie Incognito, their new left guard, is going to be out for a couple of weeks because he's suspended.
Shocker.
I think they also have somebody else coming off of another guard coming off of an injury. So the interior of that O-line isn't going to be as good. And they have a lot of rough matchups in the beginning. So that might be a guy who you pay attention to and maybe target for a trade down the line.
Right.
Because his early season schedule's rough. And, again, missing some offensive pieces.
Also have to play two top 8 rushing defenses twice a year in the Chargers and in the Broncos. So that's 4 games right there where it's going to be kind of tough.
Just as a philosophy, I'm going to probably stay away from all the rookie running backs this year.
But there is an upside with rookie running backs. They're the most likely ones to be guys who make that step into the top 5 echelon category. We saw it with Kareem Hunt when he came into the league. We saw it with Saquon
Howard.
Jordan Howard, Saquon Barkley. So keeping a tab on rookie running backs a lot of the time. And there's actually a rookie when we're doing the there's another rookie that hasn't been brought up yet, who I'm going to bring up when we do the targets, because he hasn't popped enough yet where I feel like I'm worried about him. Now in 2 weeks he might end up being a top 6 or 7 round pick.
At running back?
Yeah.
Huh.
So I think that wraps up this episode. If you want to check out the podcast, you can follow it at Draftvice on Twitter, at Draftvice_football on Instagram. You can follow Shane at _Shane_MCM on Instagram. Ricky, this is always happens every time.
I'm dark. I go dark. Don't worry about it.
You could send him a carrier pigeon.
Yeah, you could try. Send Paul Revere down the river, see if it gets to me.
It might find him. And you follow me at Brojo Death Punch. It's BROJO. Death is in the end of life. And punch. Yay. And if you're listening to this on iTunes, subscribe, rate, leave a review, preferably 5 stars. Just a suggestion. And if you're watching it on YouTube, like it, subscribe it, leave a comment. Maybe we'll read it. Maybe we'll read it on the air. We won't. We might. We absolutely can.
We should.
When I woke up this morning, I was feeling pretty dangerous.
About the past and about the